In the Baroque Belvedere Palace in Vienna hangs one of the most haunting paintings of the 20th century.
It actually is moving and disturbing and disruptive beyond belief. It was a picture that actually made me cry.
A painting of two lovers clinging to each other, seemingly on the edge of an abyss.
What it does convey is the idea of a universal human theme, which is very important to all of us. I mean, on the one hand, death, on the other hand, sex.
The picture contains an unusual autobiographical story. Painted by one of Vienna's young geniuses, Egon Schiele, this is his tribute to his lover who stood by him in his darkest hour and whom he discarded ruthlessly. But death was to stalk both this picture and the artist who painted it.
Although the male figure is staring out at us in this very, 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 very cold, chill way, you do have a question mark in your mind whether he's dead or alive.
This is a painting that looks at the end of a relationship and also hints at the end of the world. Death and the Maiden was painted in Vienna, the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where a decaying power gave birth to a culture of innovation and anxiety. Extremist political ideas and the new science of psychoanalysis flourished in a climate that combined aggression with morbid doubt. In the early years of the 20th century, this empire was described as the second weakest among the world's great powers. Out of this ferment came Death and the Maiden, painted in 1915. The death-like male at the center is a self-portrait. Egon Schiele was one of the greatest artists of the 20th century and one of the most self-obsessed. He painted this work at a turning point in his life. Schiele was abandoning his first great love and was about to be swept away by the First World War. The picture is filled with a sense of death, the death of a passionate love affair, the death of the old Europe. At the center of this city, it was Schiele who cast himself in the role of death.
Well, Schiele's face is, of course, translated into the face of death. And death is biting into the neck of the young maiden in a sort of Dracula way. So it's a very frightening scene.
Schieler's companion in Death and the Maiden was Vali Neutzel. She was the daughter of a school teacher, but remarkably little is known about her. They met in 1911, probably introduced by the most famous artist in Vienna, Gustav Klimt, for whom Vali had modelled. Schiele was 21 years old, and Vali was 17.
It was clearly a great love affair. It was also a great lust affair, to judge from the drawings that Schiele made of this obviously extraordinarily attractive and sexy woman.
We don't know a great deal about Vali, but from what we do know, she must have been a fascinating young woman because at the age of 17, she met Schiele and she was quite prepared to take her clothes off and, be painted naked and get into a relationship with him. And she had already been a model for Klimt, and Klimt is hardly known for his restrained pictures of women's sexuality.
Intense as his relationship with Vali was, Schiele's greatest subject remained himself. He painted hundreds of self-portraits and collaborated with photographers to produce dramatic images of the tormented artist.
Schiele was obsessed with his own image like no other 20th century artist. It's true to say that a great many 20th century artists, particularly in the German-speaking countries, were concerned with the self-portrait, with the self. But none of them really can be compared with Schiele, who was, not to put too fine a point on it, a narcissist.
I think someone said that it's no coincidence that the word ego is the beginning of Egon Schieles' name. He has an ability to take something very personal and widen it up and make it into every man's experience. But clearly he's very interested in his absolute own visceral experience of life.
Sexual anguish loomed large in Schieles' brief life. He even painted pictures of himself masturbating.
Schiele was not only fascinated by sex, indeed obsessed by it, he was also fascinated and obsessed by death, probably in equal measure.
When Schiele met Varley, he was depressed and wanted to leave Vienna. The great Gustav Klimt had told Schiele he was a remarkable artist, but his work was not selling. Schiele and Varley made the curious and ultimately disastrous decision to move to the small town of Neulimbach, 30 miles from Vienna. Here, an unmarried bohemian couple living together provoked suspicion. Examples of Schieles' erotic preoccupations, drawings of very young girls, lay around the house he shared with Varley. In provincial Austria, this was a recipe for disaster.
He did paint these extraordinarily erotic pictures of young women, and they did get him into trouble because they were openly displayed around his studio, and he didn't think that it was worth keeping them hidden. And people saw that, and he got arrested. He got arrested for these depraved pictures which might corrupt innocence and youth. So he had to stand trial for that.
In 1912, Schiele spent 24 days in prison in Neulimbach, where he painted watercolours of his cell. At his trial, the judge burnt one of his erotic drawings in the courtroom.
Schiele, being a narcissist, is also, and it's not a difficult leap to make, a bit paranoid. That's to say, he believes the whole world is against him. Nobody really appreciates him sufficiently as an artist. The greatest fuel to this delusion of his, really, about how the world hated him, was his time in prison. I'm sorry, really, to sound so censorious, but he does have the ability to get on one's nerves, even 100 years after the event, so to speak.
Throughout Schieles' trial and imprisonment, Varley stood by him as a loyal friend, and yet we know of only one document written by her. This curious scribble in one of Schieles' notebooks is a comment that has been interpreted in different ways.
I declare today, the 8th of January 1913, that I'm not in love with anyone in the world. Varley.
Was Varley playing hard to get? Or does the note prove that she was under Schieles' thumb?
Well, it tells us that Schiele was obviously the stronger person and wanted to have the lead. So he must have pestered her to make a statement. And what could be a better statement than an official one?
Some people have seen this as a sign of Schiele trying to manipulate her and say that, you know, sign this contract, you don't want to be married to me. But that seems really implausible. We know that she was quite free-spirited and bohemian, and it seems humorous the way it's set down. I imagine more it was a lover's discussion and that she was declaring her independence.
In 1914, the First World War broke out, but Schiele was busy gazing out of his window, fascinated by two sisters he had glimpsed in his neighbourhood. He wrote this beautifully painted letter to them, inviting them both out on a date. He even suggested his girlfriend Varley could act as a chaperone. Initially unsure which of the girls he fancied more, Schiele tried to persuade them he was a respectable young man.
Dear Miss Edith and Miss Ardell, I'm sure your mamma will allow you to go with Varley and me to the cinema, or to the Apollo, or wherever you want. Please be reassured that I was just fooling around as a hooligan momentarily. I'm not really like that. Warmest greetings, Egon Schiele.
Schiele began to seriously woo the younger of the two sisters, Edith Hans. To his friend and patron, Arthur Roessler, Schiele wrote,
I intend to get married advantageously, not to Varley.
Much as I adore and am thrilled by Schieles' art, Schiele the man, I'm afraid, doesn't appeal to me very much at all. And this is one of the episodes which puts me right off him, because he's clearly marrying for money.
It's quite cold-blooded, the way Schiele looks at Varley and decides she's not quite the ticket, she's not quite top drawer enough for him. He wants a more advantageous marriage, and he's prepared to sacrifice her.
After a close relationship lasting 4 years, Schiele seems to have made a ruthless decision. He would get rid of his friend and lover. But first, Varley could perform one last service for his art. She would be the model for the big statement he was planning to paint. His first step towards his masterpiece was this small preparatory sketch. The drawing shows that Schiele had worked out the dimensions. It was going to be big. 180 centimetres by 150 are scribbled on the side.
He's deliberating on the scale of the work, which is almost 2 metres by 1.5 metres. He's also breaking up that area by using a grid, which is rather traditional, in fact, in terms of academic practice. I think this is something he must have learned from his early training.
Schiele painted Death and the Maiden in 1915 in his studio in the Viennese suburb of Hietzing. Between January and June, Schiele worked on his major artistic statement. The painting may have come out of his relationship with Varley, but it has an obvious affinity with the work of the leading artist in Vienna. Gustav Klimt's The Kiss was Vienna's most iconic image of love between man and woman. Now Schiele set out to paint his own vision of the power of love, but in a darker vein.
Death and the Maiden is hung very close to Klimt's Kiss in the Belvedere, and they are obviously pictures that nod at one another. We know that Schiele was influenced by Klimt and admired his work, and it does seem to be a response to the very romantic and tender, almost spiritual aspects of the kiss, where love is elevated to be a greater good that can save mankind.
Klimt's The Kiss is still a conventional, quote-unquote, beautiful painting, a sort of luxurious fresco any industrialist would love to have in his music room. And Schiele is the complete antithesis, is an expressionist painting. It is, in the sense of the bourgeois, ugly, and it's full of personal emotion.
Where Klimt's The Kiss is sumptuous and geometric, Schiele's couple are splayed on a crumpled white sheet, spread on a barren landscape, a landscape that hints at the war that was destroying Europe as Schiele worked on his painting.
The background of Schieles' Death and the Maiden shows us this devastated wasteland, almost as though it's a World War I battlefield, in which these figures are cast on this rather crumpled would-be sheet or drape, which kind of functions like shroud.
This couple are kind of clinging on for dear life, but they're clearly separated. The geography is pulling them apart. Their bodies are only touching at the top half. I mean, it's a really fragmented picture. Everything about it is lumpy and awkward and pulling in two separate directions like an earthquake.
It is the emotions within a person which are translated into